Thank you very much. Thanks, David. He'll join our panel discussion now, which is going to be chaired by Mr. Michael Murtagh. And as I introduce the panel members, if they could make their way up to the front table here. Our second panel member is Mr. Andrew Campbell. We can give him a round of applause now. Absolutely. Hasn't done anything yet. However, in the past, he's done plenty. Since 1983, Andrew Campbell has been a successful investor and participant in many asset classes, including public financial markets, real estate, and emerging ventures. Andrew has 30 years' experience, including senior leadership roles as Senior Vice President of Seville Systems Incorporated, a NASDAQ company, and as General Manager of BHA Computer. His senior roles have included responsibility for strategy and execution of research and development across many countries, global product marketing and development for products generating $160 million per annum, business and growth strategies, acquisitions, financing and team building. I think that microphone's on over there, Michael, if you just want to switch it off for the time being. He has a Bachelor of Science with honours in Computer Science and an MBA both from the University of Queensland, Australia's #1 academic fundraising institution. So once again, please welcome Andrew Campbell to the panel. Thank you. Our third panel member is Mr. Bill Potter. Bill has been a founding director of 3 venture funds, Oztech Ventures, one of 7 federal government management and investment companies licensed in 1984, the North Australian Innovation Fund in 1997, and the Pioneer Pool Development Fund in 2003. All 3 funds have had an early stage technology focus, assisting ventures beyond the seed capital stage into the critical market growth phase. He was also a founding advisor to the Oz Industry Comet program in 2000. Companies invested in at an early stage include Cochlear and Peplum Biotech, which are now international listed companies. Bill is an active investor and mentor who believes in working with entrepreneurs at the mindface rather than just sitting on the board. His professional expertise includes securing intellectual property rights and negotiating technology agreements. Please welcome Mr. Bill Potter to the panel. As mentioned earlier, our chair for this panel discussion is Mr. Michael Murtagh. Michael has experience in the UK market in business and in bringing new companies to the market. Michael is a director of Cernotech and was a federal government commercialising emerging technologies business advisor from 2001 to 2010. Is more than 25 years' experience in the seed and venture capital sector, helping many Australian and international companies to commercialise their products. Michael worked in London for more than a decade with a privately operated seed capital investment firm and technology incubator. He has accumulated extensive experience in strategic planning, business development and management. He holds a master's degree in business administration from the London City University and a Bachelor of Business degree from Southern Cross University. Please welcome our chair for the panel discussion today, Michael Murtagh.
Okay, that's on, good. Okay, what I've done is I've actually I've made a few notes of myself for some questions for the panel. I've also asked a couple of members of the audience for some questions. I appreciate we're limited by time, so I'll try and get into it, and if you need to shut the question time down, give us a bit of warning, but please take care of the time. There's a couple of different areas that I'd like to touch on. One is, David, in terms of your talk, you were talking very much about the founder versus the CEO. And my question is, and that may be different in a university environment, in the sort of private sector with a lot of the companies that we see under Gold Coast Angels or Founders Forum and such, the founder is the CEO. So I'm interested in your take on, does that work? Can a founder transition from founder to CEO, or is that a recipe for disaster?
I think you've got to look at the skills and the capabilities of the individual. And one of the things that I've seen is that Australians are very good at bootstrapping companies. And that is, you work hard, you take a low salary, you put the money back into the business and you grow it and you grow it and you grow it, because we have a capital poor country in many ways. But in the technology space, when you've got a technology which has world-class technology, which has application around the world, you've got to grow that and get it out there as fast as you possibly can, because as soon as other people see your idea, they'll be trying to replicate it and build it into their products or their services. And to do that needs two things. It needs money, obviously, and that's a given. But if you've got the money, it needs someone who knows how to spend quickly, not spend parsimoniously. Someone who knows how to throw a lot of money at something and make it work, spend that money effectively to get the technology out there. And it's not a skill that is very common, because very few people have that experience in this country. So, I mean, that's just one example of where it's not really likely, I think, in many cases, that the person who comes up with the innovation, that creative soul, who's really looked at a problem and come at it from a different direction, necessarily has the skills to really grow a business quickly, because they might be very intelligent and very smart, but they've just never done it before. It's the best analogy that I've heard of is, you say to everybody, okay, have you ever flown flight simulator program? Can you fly a plane? Everyone says, yep, we've done that. That's not that hard, I can do it. Okay, now how would you feel if we gave you a $20 million jet to fly? Are you going to be capable of really doing it? And that's the sort of difference in the level of skills you need from someone who's been used to being a small business person, perhaps, running their own business or whatever, to suddenly have to spend $20 million in the space of a year or two to really ramp something up and get it out there. I mean, this is the extreme case, obviously. It's not too many who have the skill. Some do, no question, but not that.
I'm always struck by the difference between Australia and the States in this respect. And I hear all this rational talk about skills and et cetera, but when I look at the States, what I see is creators, inventors, entrepreneurs who are passionate about what they're doing, who get backed by capital and who continue. And my personal experience is that the difference between failure and success is not who's on your board, but the absolute commitment to eat, live and breathe the innovation by the entrepreneur, by the creators. Now, I know you have to put all sorts of people around them, and they do that much more readily in the States because they've got deeper pockets. But what I notice in particular in relation to U of Q, where I spent many happy years, is that there's this rational approach. You incorporate the company, the inventor, the researcher keeps his job at his superannuation. You give a conditional licence to the company that if the company's ever invested, then the inventor might have a consulting role or something. But you're waiting for the entrepreneur, for the champion with the passion to come along, where if he's encouraged, he's already there. So, I mean, the obvious cases in the States are Apple, which wasn't a university-funded thing. I think Jobs was a dropout. Apple, Jobs and Wozniak in the garage coming out. You then have Gates, of course, who was a dropout from Harvard, coming out. But the really interesting example to me is Google, where those two guys were PhD students at Stanford. And Sequoia Capital and somebody else put 27 million into them, which helps. Put a CEO, a CFO, a COO, a C everything else around them. But those two guys were still in there because it was at an early stage of development. And of course, we see the result today. So I guess what I'd like to see in the Australian context is let's get a little bit away from the rational, more into the emotional, and let's see some passion where university researchers, and I've seen this in modern times, when the young researcher is not guaranteed tenure and superannuation, they're much more likely to be spun out in the company. And I think that's when we'll get really successful, is when there's a lot more passion with these younger inventors, entrepreneurs, and so on. And the one thing I agree wholeheartedly with David is when you cut those guys out, even if they're a hell of a lot of trouble and difficult to deal with, when you cut them out, that's the death of the enterprise, because they're the ones who had the passion, the creator's passion to see it succeed.
I've got a very slightly different angle on that. I think there's been quite a difference between entrepreneurs in North America and Australia, and it shows up very heavily in how much they see their vision as a one-off. And a lot of Australian innovators and entrepreneurs think their big idea now is their big chance in life, and they associate their their permanent future lifetime goals with this one idea. So they're very, very attached, frequently very committed, and unprepared to let any of the baby go to anyone else. And that has a big impact on negotiations, structuring, financing, future responsibilities and roles in the organisation. In North America, I think there's a more realistic attachment to each particular idea, and a lot of people there are a lot of serial entrepreneurs. There's armies of them in some areas, particularly in the US, but also in Canada, of serial entrepreneurs, and they know this idea's only got a 3-year lifetime. They're going to cash in. If they've got to dilute out heavily early on to get some return on it, that's okay, because there's another idea that they can either pick up, come up with themselves, acquire whatever, coming along in the pipeline a little way down the track. And that has a big difference in who they'll engage with, the ventures they'll form, the partnerships they'll form, the dilution they'll take, the investment they'll take, and how they'll operate the business. And it means that their personal life is not completely tied to the outcome of that venture. So you get a slightly different reality in it. However, the ones, and Google's a good example, all those, the very mega American success stories, are where they've identified it is the big chance in life, but it is really big, and it's big enough to be totally attached to it. And I think in Australia, we think every idea we've got is the one chance in life and the big one that we can't let go. And I think that affects it all very heavily.
Thanks for that. David, this question is the same question, but in two different contexts. David, you mentioned it's important to, in response to the last question, that the CEO has the ability to get out there and spend and make it happen. What happens if there was an unlimited budget? Would you have better outcomes? And the question is, what damage could those additional funds do? Now, there's two components to this question. First of all, Andrew, I would like you to look at that from a company perspective. David, I'd like you to look at it from a UniQuest perspective.
I don't quite understand the question. You go ahead.
Right, I'll say it. Yeah, this is the thing. Like, having unlimited budget is not a guarantee of success by any means. It's how well you spend it. And we've got a classic case of a Brisbane innovation, which is a coating for solar cells that is anti-reflective, so that when the sun shines on the solar cells, it doesn't reflect away off the glass. The energy goes into the solar cells, and it can give you a 1 or 2% improvement in efficiency of the solar cells, which doesn't sound much. But in the solar cell game, that's a big leap forward. This technology was taken to the US, and they got the wrong CEO who didn't have the right skills in to run it. Spent $20 million, and the thing collapsed, basically. So it was brought back here, restarted, and is running very effectively now, partly because of the lessons learned in the first one, but still. That's it's having an unlimited budget is no guarantee of success. It's all about the ability to spend the money wisely and well and effectively to move the whole thing forward.
I think everyone's probably noticed, but the ability of companies to squander money is just breathtaking, and only governments can beat it. If households behaved the same way, they wouldn't get their kids out the door in the morning. I think that part of the management of funds in a company has got to come down to some very hard-nosed people, and innovators put in charge of the bank balance will pursue ideas and things that just can never turn into a sort of commercial reality. So there has to be hard-nosed people on both advisory boards and boards. And when there is, often you can get a good outcome. And as David spoke about earlier, the relationships between them and how they were chosen in the first place can have a big bearing on whether that works. But the number of programs that run through companies that have raised maybe $5 million or $10 million that are just completely squandered, as David mentioned then, never cease to amaze me. And someone funded that and paid for that and let it happen. And you've got to ask why, and why didn't they put in place controls, and weren't they interested? The whole team has to be behind the spending, the budgets, the variances, the marketing programs, or else someone's just going to be out of pocket at the end of it, and typically that is the outcome.
Thanks. Yeah, all the talk is about the CEO. What I need to see in a company, and often act this role myself, is a CFO. Because I agree that the biggest problem is cash burn off. And it happens in every startup. And if you're going to survive long enough to succeed, you've got to really husband whatever investment you've got. And this is a big difference between us and the States. I mean, Google had 27 million to play with on day one. We just don't have that sort of money. So let's not focus on the CEO, putting a CEO into the company. Let's put in the CFO.
Thanks for that. Some years ago, just one sec, Brian. Some years ago, Brian, Griffith University had the head of tech transfer from Johns Hopkins University out here in Australia, and asked the guy, okay, you guys, you're doing so many tech transfer spin-outs and that, you must be really have fantastic relationships with the venture capital industry. And their response was, forget it, the venture capital industry is too hard, too late, and we're not bothered. Our key focus is spinning out to angel groups. So we're an angel group here, and I'd be interested to see a different, is there a different perspective in the US versus here? Are universities spinning out to angel groups, and is that a large proportion of it, or a very minor proportion? And I suppose I'm looking at it, how can we better engage with universities to get those deal flow?
Look, certainly the angel groups are much more active in the US and with the universities there than in Australia. But it's not, angel groups are working in Australia, and most of the angel groups have got, I think, one or two investments from universities. I know it's the case with Brisbane Angels. I think a couple of the Sydney ones and the Melbourne and Adelaide ones have all got deals from universities. I guess the difference, I think, is that Australia is a bit more skewed towards IT and things that, the web, etc., which generates a quicker return and a more ready exit in this country than the more sort of traditional fundamental plays that you see happening in the US. Partly that's because a lot of the entrepreneurial wealth in Australia has come from the IT sector, so that's the angel groups generally have a higher proportion of people from that sector, perhaps some equivalent groups do in the US, so that skews the thinking as well.
Thanks for that. I've been given the wind up, so we'll call that the end of the session. Thanks very much, David, Andrew and Bill.